On behalf of Peninsula Symphony, welcome to this recital. We're very glad you're here. This is the first time that I'm performing with Eugene, very much looking forward to it. We're going to do something different this time. Rather than just give a recital, rather than just play, we're going to talk. I'm going to do a fair amount of talking, and of course you can ask questions as well. I'm a member of Peninsula Symphony. We're giving a concert in 2 weeks. I encourage you all to come to it. I'm a board member. Eugene used to be a board member. So you all remember Beethoven, and you remember him looking like this, wild and crazy hair, this fierce stare in his eyes. Well, that's not what we're going to be playing today. We're going to be playing a work by Beethoven in his earlier life. Here's a picture of Beethoven when he was early in his early 30s. How was he described? He was short and thin. He had a large head, thick, bristly, coal-black hair, pockmarked face, broad forehead, bushy eyebrows, small mouth. He sounds like a real winner. How did he comport himself? Interestingly, wholly lacking in grace. He was clumsy, full of cuts when he shaved himself, slovenly dressed, and what I think is the most funny is he couldn't dance in time. He had no sense of rhythm, very odd. In terms of personality, he was reserved, stiff, haughty. He would throw food at his housekeeper if he didn't like it. But of course, with his friends, he was merry, mischievous, witty, loquacious, scatological. That seems to be an affliction affecting a lot of composers. When listening to what he considered mediocre music, he would just burst into laughter. So where are we in Beethoven's life? We're in the early 1800s. In the late 1790s, he had just moved to Vienna. Now, typically, I put a picture of the house where the composer lived. I couldn't find one because when Beethoven was in Vienna, he lived in 60 different places. At this point in his life, he knew his gift. People recognized his talent, and in fact, he had a reasonable business model. He sought rich guys to pay him to compose, princes typically. He would participate in piano competitions for money, and he taught piano, and of course, he would fall in love with the girls that he was teaching. Here's one of them. He had no problem getting commissions throughout his life. However, interestingly, he died broke. So Beethoven's music is typically divided into 3 periods. The early classical period, in which we see some of his early string quartets, first 2 symphonies, many of the violin sonatas, one of which we're playing today, and some piano stuff. In the middle period, this was his so-called heroic period, his symphonies 3 through 8, middle string quartets, more piano stuff. And then in his late, or I call crazy period, this is from his 9th symphony, late string quartets, and sorry, Eugene, yet more piano stuff. So we're going to play a piece called the Spring Sonata. This name was given to the work not by Beethoven himself, but by people after his death. It was composed in 1801, and I put a picture of happy Beethoven here because this is a happy piece. This piece was composed about a year before he wrote this very famous document that's shown here, the Heiligenstadt document, where he despairs over his deafness, and he contemplates suicide and his desire to overcome his physical and emotional ailments to complete his destiny. But of course, that's a year into the future. We're still in a relatively happy period of time. So what are Beethoven's goals for this piece? Well, the musical goals are to write music that people recognize in terms of context. He used what's called sonata form. That's a well-defined group of movements, fast, slow, fast, fast, and the piece we're playing today has that. So the audience knew this, they expected this. And what did Beethoven do to set himself apart? He chose to distinguish himself in terms of expressiveness, mood changes, humor and trickery, and we're going to point out quite a bit of that here, advanced harmony, and then what I call motifs, little pieces, snippets of music that occur throughout that tie the music together. So let's give an example. Here's the first movement. It begins with a gentle, flowing melody on the violin, accompanied by a patterned rhythm in the piano. The music shifts from happy to sad. The bass in the piano has these motifs that give it some intensity. And I wanted to point out there's some interesting things that Beethoven does in his music that you should listen for. He does these crescendos, and I diagram it here in purple, crescendo up to a sudden piano. The music gets louder, and all of a sudden, it's piano. He does that all throughout. I have no idea why. I don't know if anybody knows why. Another thing that he likes to do is to dissolve the melody into the fundamental units. So what I'm going to start here and show this to you. So you hear 5 notes. He repeats it. 5 notes. 2 notes. 2 notes. 2. So he's taking the music and distilling it down to its fundamental unit. Okay, so we're going to play now the first movement of the Beethoven Spring Sonata. Oh, yeah. One more thing is there's a total of 7 movements that we're going to be talking between each one. Okay? So 2 pieces total, 7 movements total. And I don't need my glasses. Okay, so in sonata form, the second movement is typically a slow movement. This one is marked adagio. It's very slow, very expressive. He writes it very typically with melody in the right hand and an accompaniment called an Alberti bass in the left hand after this guy, Alberti. So you know that piece, right? That's Alberti bass in the bass line. Can you do it again? So that's Alberti bass, and Beethoven uses that all over. He also does something really unusual for composers of his time, which I would call operatic ornamentation. As you know, in the piano, you play a note, it decrescendos, it gets softer, right? It can't really sustain like the violin does. So in this one part here, maybe Eugene, you can play it, he does a repeated note. It's as if an opera singer is singing some sort of tune. There's some sort of words, I'm not sure what. Can you show us that? So it sounds like somebody singing. And then it gets even more unusual here. So you can hear in this, there's elements of the next movement in music, which is romantic music. All right, so let's play now this slow movement. So the next movement in sonata form is typically a minuet. A minuet is a slow dance in 3/4, but sometimes composers would substitute a faster version of it, which is called scherzo. Scherzo is Italian for joke, and in this case, I think that the joke is the one that Beethoven was playing on the audience. I diagrammed here this unusual piece. Actually, can you play it? Play just the first part, and then I'll show you what I'm talking about. So what's unusual about this is that when the audience hears it for the first time, you have no idea what the counting is. You can't tell, is it in 3, is it in 4? And in fact, the way that it's written, you can see down here, the way that it's written to me, in the first 20 years that I knew this piece, is the first bar is in 4, and then he has 2 bars of 3, and then 1 bar of 1. It's 1 bar of 2. It's very unusual, very tricky. And then when the violin comes in, the violin's actually after the beat, 1 more beat. So I think what he's trying to do is confuse the audience. It confuses the musicians too, yeah. So the third movement is what I would call a mini sonata form. And sonata form we're not going to talk about at length today, but it has a typical structure to it. And what's interesting is in the middle of a typical sonata movement, there's typically a long section where the composer explores the various things that he or she is writing about, new keys, new melodies, new harmonies. In this particular piece, scherzos have development sections as well. In this piece, the scherzo development section is as short as possible. It's 4 bars, takes about 3 seconds to go by, and I'm sure the audience was scratching his head. In fact, the whole movement is only about 1.5 minutes. The second part of a minuet is called a trio. Typically it's slower, sometimes a different key, new theme. What he does here, instead of doing something slower, he just keeps going with crazy scales up and down. You'll hear us going up and down. Then back to the beginning, whole thing's over in 1.5 minutes. So we're going to play the third movement. We're going to play then the fourth movement, which I'll talk about right now. The fourth movement is what's called a rondo. Rondo is Italian for return. The way the music works is you have the theme. He explores something else. The theme comes back. He explores something else, etc. In the middle of this piece, there's a part in triplets that Eugene, he brought me to the light here. He told me that this part to him sounds like breakdancing, hence the breakdancer. And the way it works is the violin's doing, fast triplets. You'll hear it. So the violin does that, and then the piano does that. So we go back and forth for a while. In the end, he puts a little chorale, like a Bach chorale. The music stops. All of a sudden, this slow thing comes in. Can you play it? Anybody listening at the time would be scratching their head, why in this fast movement did he put a slow chorale in there? But of course he quickly changes the theme back to fast. And then in the ending, he's trying to fool the audience. This piece is full of all sorts of unusual rhythms, some of which I've demonstrated here. Every time the theme comes back, it's a different rhythm. At the end, most composers would go, but Beethoven doesn't want to do that. He wants to do something different. He could do, but he doesn't want to do that either. He actually wants to jazz it up. This was long before jazz, but he really wanted to write, when you tap the rhythm. But, composers didn't do that kind of thing back then. So he actually gets at it by putting in some extra notes. So you'll hear that at the very end. All right, so here we go with the third and fourth movements. Next fourth movement, rondo. piece has a lot of notes for the violin, so I need to use my work computer. Sorry, love. I'll try not to break it.
It doesn't look stable to me.
It works. It works. Wait.
Well, so
This is a Bluetooth page flipper. I step on it and it turns the page. It works.
So while he's getting there, I'll explain something that. So this is the violin part for all three Brahms sonatas. This is the piano part for.
So I just want to let everyone know that he has about 5 times as many notes as I do, and he's getting paid 5 times as much as I'm getting paid.
And for violinists, page turns are a pretty rare event compared to pianists. So my analogy is, for us, page turns are like your monthly mortgage payment. And for them, it's like a refi.
That's good. All right, so the next piece we're going to play, a total of 3 movements, is by Johannes Brahms, lived from 1833 to 1897. I was interested to know, I read this biography by Jan Swafford, very interesting book, highly recommend it. Brahms is German for broom, as in the plant, so his actual name is Johnny Broom, which I didn't know. So he was born in a fishing village in Hamburg, a fishing village, and his dad was, so they called it a beer fiddler, which is exactly what it sounded like, a guy who played music in music halls, in beer halls. Brahms never really outgrew these North German ideals: loving wife, cozy kitchen and parlor, laughing children. Of course, like most composers, he never achieved any of that, but that was his goal. Are there any children here? Okay, we're going to present this anyway. Here's my first job. I'm sorry?
There are some, they're middle school.
You can ask your mom later.
They can cover theirs.
So this is my first job. I was delivering newspapers. I was taking over my brother's paper route for a while. Johannes Brahms' first job was as a pianist in a brothel, and you can ask your mom what that means. It was in Hamburg. According to this book, the prostitutes would tease him. I mean, he's 13 years old. They would tease him, abuse him perhaps, and this led to unusual relationships with women. He had essentially difficulty sleeping with the women he loved, and he had difficulty loving the women he slept with. So what was Brahms like? He apparently had a big heart. He loved children, but like many people, he was self-absorbed, arrogant, curt, sarcastic, insulting. He would take advantage of his friends. He was actually very good looking in his youth, and the women picked this up, and he used this to his advantage. He was misogynistic. He was a person of his time. He was anti-Semitic, also a person of his time. To really understand Brahms, you have to learn a little bit, you have to understand a little bit about Robert and Clara Schumann. So Robert Schumann was an older composer at the time. He was very famous. He was a music writer. He produced a journal all about music. So his wife, Clara Schumann, was a very famous pianist, in fact, much better than Brahms himself. In 1853, Brahms is 20 years old. Schumann hears Brahms' music for the first time, and he declares that Brahms is the next elect composer. He's the next great composer. Of course, at the time, he had hardly composed anything, but Schumann was very impressed. And over the next 2 decades, Brahms struggles to produce music that could meet this elevated ideal. Well, simultaneously, Brahms falls in love with Schumann's wife, and then Schumann himself has psychotic depression, hospitalized, and dies. Long, sad story. Brahms is finally free to marry Clara. She has 5 children at the time, but he decides not to, complicated reasons. They remain platonic lovers for the rest of their lives. They exchange these very passionate letters to each other, but never consummated. Now, Brahms had a habit of doing this. There was Clara. He fell in love with Clara's daughter, Julie, several piano students. He actually had a group of women, a Frauenchor, that he fell in love with some of them as well. Brahms, of course, never marries, and he has this eternal issue. He has this issue women who he'd like to love, but he puts them up on a pedestal so he can't really have a relationship with them. Interestingly, we're going to play the first Brahms violin sonata, but apparently there were 4 violin sonatas before this. Brahms had this habit of burning much of the music that he composed when he was young. His goal was to make sure that every piece he produced was a masterpiece. When he finally did have his ideas, he was actually more or less able to write them down quickly, with the exception of his first symphony that I think took 15 years to compose. At the time, there was a big dispute between Brahms on the right and Wagner on the left. Wagner was into romantic music. This is subjective, emotional, idiosyncratic, fantastic, nationalistic music, grand, terrible, sublime. These are all the things that describe romantic music. Examples are the art song and, most importantly, opera. Brahms never wrote an opera. Apparently, he had an idea for an opera that involved something happening in a sheriff in the western part of the United States. Brahms' music is more classical. He's backwards looking, but he tries to give insight to the audience by stretching classical music beyond what it was currently. Now, many composers, as you know, were poor. Beethoven struggled to compose for rich princes. Mozart struggled, as you all remember from the movie. He died a pauper. Haydn was a court composer. But by age 35, Brahms was financially set. He could compose what he wanted, when he wanted, and he never, ever took a commission. He had more money than he needed. So the piece we're going to play, his first violin sonata, was composed in a town called Portola, which is on Lake Worth here, which is northeast of Vienna. And this is what it looks like today. It looks like a beautiful place. He actually composed in this shack here that Mahler subsequently used for some of his pieces. So the first moment we're going to play is quiet, peaceful, placid, sunny throughout. You'll hear 3 repeated notes throughout. The violin starts. You'll hear that theme over and over. And again, I want to point out that the violin part shown here, pretty much 1 note at a time. My part's pretty easy. Eugene has all the hard stuff here, thankfully. Thankfully, I don't have it. This is typical sonata form for those who are familiar with that. The coda is a big finish. Okay, so for sonata form, the second movement is a slow movement. Brahms takes this very seriously. He writes adagio very, very slow. It's really four parts. The first part is an earnest, serious, noble romance. Do you want to play like the first bit of it there? He's getting something to drink. So it's like a love song. The second part is a foreboding, restless funeral march. It sounds very symphonic to me, especially when we play it together. You want to demonstrate that part? And then at the end, he puts it together, both things happening at the same time, and you'll hear some horn calls at the end. It'll sound very familiar to you. Okay, so here's the second movement. All right, so the last movement of this piece is faster. The piece is called the Reign Sonata because it was based on a poem and a song that he wrote, which we're trying to play here, a song that he wrote a few years earlier. And the song is for a singer. See if this works. Enough of that. So the violin plays the same thing. Of course, I'm not going to be singing. Thank you very much. So here's the poem that this was based on, a contemporary of his by the name of Klaus Groth. It describes his feelings on a rainy day. I was hoping for rain. We're praying for rain today.
And we picked this piece to pair with the Spring Sonata, hoping that it would bring rain, seriously.
And it almost did. It almost did. So again, you'll hear it's long, short, long, just like in the first movement. You'll also hear play a part at the beginning. The piano has this pitter-patter that sounds like rain to us. And that's throughout the movement. Brahms liked his second movement. He liked it so much, he put it back into his third movement. He recalls a portion of the second movement, but incorporates the rain aspect into it. In the end, he stretches the piece out. It becomes very quiet, very peaceful, very content. He does the melody twice as slow. So here we go, third and last movement.